Well, I'm super excited to have with me today on the Speaking of Harvey podcast, Jeff Goins. Jeff is a writer, a speaker, a creative, just an all-around kind of Renaissance guy. And I have had the pleasure of seeing him at several conferences and seeing him on several stages. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Scott. When did we last see each other? I feel like it was recent-ish.
It was at the Free the Dream conference.
Oh, yeah.
Ravenscraft's conference.
Right.
Yeah, not too long ago. And
Yep.
but we'll jump in the Wayback Machine. You and I first met way back in John Acuff's Start Conference, way back when he worked for Ramsey.
Mm-hmm.
And
That was a great conference.
It was a great conference. And that's when I first heard about you, read several of your books since, and seen you on several stages since. We just kind of seem to run in the same circles. But not everybody out there, I know this is a shock to you, knows who you are and what you do. But tell my audience a little bit about who is Jeff Goins.
I think I learned this first from John, actually, speaking of John Acuff, where, he said, if you haven't heard of me, then you're like most people. I mean, the internet has trained us to believe that most people have heard of us, and it's a big world.
Right.
So thank you. I'm honored to be here. I am a writer who helps other writers. That's probably the most succinct way I can say it. For the past almost 10 years now, I've been writing books, keeping up a blog, and now I have a podcast, and sharing what I've learned about writing and creative entrepreneurship with my audience. And so I write books, speak. I'm not really doing much of that right now.
Right.
And teach online courses and programs for writers and creatives. But all of my work really is about helping creative people succeed.
Yeah, I love that. And just for perspective from the audience, because I don't know when they're going to be listening to this, Jeff and I are recording this during the COVID quarantine. And so
hopefully they're listening to it and they're like, what was that thing? I don't even remember that. It's a distant memory.
Yeah, hopefully they're listening to it far in the future and they're like, yeah, that time sucked, but it made us better as a species.
That's right. Yeah.
I saw you most recently at the Cliff Ravenscraft conference that we talked about. Prior to that, I attended Tribe Conference, and I'd love to tell you that I've attended every one, but I attended one, and then it kind of shut down. So talk a little bit about what Tribe Conference was and kind of how that life cycle came about.
So that was very intentional, and we let people know the year before the final year, which was the one that you were at, that we were going to discontinue it. I have learned recently that I cling to things.
Okay.
I cling to people and to situations and experiences that provide comfort for me. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I was talking to a friend today. We had a social distance walk. We went to the park and we were hanging out, just going for a walk. And I said, I remember when I would hang out with people and I wouldn't want them to leave. And I realized this about myself. It's an unhealthy, codependent, anxious attachment kind of thing. It feels unhealthy to me. It's like, we'd be hanging out for coffee and I wouldn't ever explicitly say this, but I would feel the desire to like keep the conversation going. And I've realized that a lot of what I do has been based on that fear, that anxiety of being alone, of being left. And so what do? I create communities where I bring people around me. And it's traditionally been very hard for me to quit things, to end things, because it's the loss of that security, right? Well, as I've been working through my stuff, I've realized, no, some things need to end. And just because something ends doesn't mean it was bad.
Right.
Think of all the relationships, friendships, jobs, experiences, vacations, things in your life that ended. And I imagine you go back and look at all of them and you wouldn't say they're all bad. And probably almost all of them you learned something from. And so with the Tribe Conference, it was never intended to be a long-term thing. We did it once to see if we could pull it off. And the first one we did, we're like, well, we'll sell tickets to next year's conference. And they're like, oh, we have another conference. We did that for, 4 years in a row. And so it was like, oh, we eventually have to stop doing that at some point. Otherwise, we're going to keep having an event. And I remember telling my team at the time, I think I'm getting tired of this. I think I want to stop doing this. And this was around year 3, moving into year 4. And then year 4 came around and I told my team, I was like, I need to quit this. This needs to stop. And they were all like, yeah, we know. I was like, what do you mean you know?
Right.
And everybody thinks this is great. What do you mean you know? And they said, no, for, the longest time you said you wanted to do it for 5 years, and next year is year 5. And so that makes sense. And I was like, I did. I don't remember saying that. So the shuttering of that conference, which many people said they loved, and I really enjoyed it, was probably one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in this part of my career, running this business. Very fulfilling thing to do, very expensive thing to do, very time consuming and resource consuming thing to do. But it was probably the first time where I didn't try to drag something out. Like it's the equivalent of like going out to lunch with somebody and not like trying to keep them there as long as possible by asking them some question right before they need to leave or something. It was like, okay, it's been an hour. Good seeing you. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
It was the opposite of clinging, and it felt really good. And so, I shared this at the conference, the processing of the experience of letting go of good things, very powerful and important for me. And the phrase, I heard it. I was going for a walk before I delivered kind of my final keynote talk at the conference, but it just kind of popped into my mind, which was that sometimes the good has to end before the better can begin.
Yeah.
And that's such a hard choice to make, because this thing right here is good.
Yeah.
And why would I give up a good thing for the unknown? But I've learned that at least in creative work, it's good to let some good things go to make room for the next new thing. And I spent so much time and energy running this event that was great and people loved it. But I was ready to do something new, and I was ready to let go of that old thing and I didn't even know what the new thing was, but I wanted to create space for that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you kind of intentionally reclaimed some margin.
Yeah.
And at the Free the Dream stage, when I saw you last, you were like, I kind of climbed to the top of a ladder and realized I was leaned against a wall I didn't care much about. Yeah. Because you're at the height of this successful conference, but then to kind of say, it's not really what I want to do.
Yeah.
I think that's really mature and really cool that you were able to kind of realize that and model it for your community, to say it's never too late to do something different.
Yeah. Yeah. The way I thought of it is this is school, right? And this is senior year. This is actually, 5th year senior at this point. You've graduated. Go start your own thing. There's plenty of things that I do that I want people to stick around for.
Right.
This felt like it was done.
Yeah.
And we could keep trying to drag it out. But then you turn it into something that it was never intended to be. And I could feel that. And we all have, it's like most of what I do are projects that have an end. So I write a book, I finish it, I go, it's done. And there's a certain point for me with a book that if I keep messing with it, it breaks it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've experienced this with writing songs, publishing blog posts, even podcasts. I'm like, let me try that again. And I start messing with it so much that whatever it is, which is not perfect, but whatever it is I'm editing and refining, I'm breaking it. It's like you bake a cake, you pull it out, you go, wait, let's put it back in there. Oh, wait. And you keep messing with it, the cake's going to be brittle and just let it be what it is.
Yeah. Love that. So, this podcast being kind of focused on helping people launch and grow their speaking business, how has speaking affected your career up to now?
So it's looked different at different stages. So early on, I was told writers need to speak and speakers need to write. And so I said, okay. So I started speaking, and speaking was a means for me to grow my audience, to reach new people. Didn't make a ton of money off of it at first, but it was a way to grow my email list, get my name out there. And then there was a season when our daughter was born where I just didn't travel very much. So speaking was this thing where I was like, I don't really need to do that. I can just stay home and do the online thing and do webinars, and that's the same thing. And then recently, the past couple of years, I've gotten back into speaking more as an art form and as a serious profession, where I take it very, very seriously. I like it. I feel like I'm pretty good at it. I want to be great at it, which means I need a lot of practice. And speaking now for me is a way to practice sharing an idea in a different modality that I'm used to sharing it.
Yeah.
And I see podcast interviews, my own podcast, speaking. It's a way to play with an idea. And I take it very seriously in terms of the practice, the preparation. But when perform for an audience, and I do think of it as a performance, I'm learning.
Yeah.
While I'm sharing the thing that I'm sharing, I'm learning in how they respond to it. I'm learning in that something spontaneously came out of my mouth that I didn't plan to say. And I'm like, I think that's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
I think speaking for me right now is the most fun way to learn what I think about something.
I love that. And I think speaking allows, as opposed to writing, and I have not finished a book, I'm in the process of writing a book, but when you write, I think you just put things down and you hope somebody's going to like this one of these days. Whereas speaking, as soon as you say the line, you visually see feedback from people.
Yeah, it's a much tighter feedback loop. And I love that. That's what I liked about blogging when I started blogging was I would write something and then by tomorrow I'd get a response. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And there's a healthy and unhealthy version of it where you can kind of go down this rabbit trail of just telling people what they want to hear.
Yes.
And that becomes a bit anemic. But I like the thrill, even like thinking of like a stand-up bit comedian where it's like, I live or die on the next line.
Yeah.
And if I say the wrong thing, I lose them. And you can see it as a speaker. And I actually kind of like the thrill of like, oh, I'm losing them. I've got to do something.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge rush.
Totally.
Yeah. You posted recently, because I follow you online, as everybody should. You post great content, but you posted that you wanted to do more public speaking. What made you decide to kind of do this now?
I think it's fun.
Yeah.
And I'm good at it and I want to be better at it. So I have to do more of it. And I've started to find ways to make pretty good money doing it. And so it's fun. I'm good at it. I can make money doing it. I'm experiencing this interesting, I don't know, renaissance in my work where I'm going back to the stuff that doesn't scale.
Yeah.
Which is the antithesis of what all my entrepreneur friends are saying. Like, you can't trade, hours for dollars or whatever. And like, speaking doesn't scale. It's just me, and I only have so much time, and I can only deliver so many speeches.
Right.
But that's how I want to spend my time, making things and sharing them with people.
Yeah.
And I want to be there for the experience,
Yeah. Love that. It helps people. It pays well, and it's super fun.
Yeah.
There are definitely things we could gripe about when it comes to speaking, but all in all, it's a ton of fun. Now, for a guy, I see you, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a writer who speaks as opposed to a speaker who writes. Would you say that's correct?
Sure. And I take issue with that whole dichotomy that people are like, are you a speaker who writes or a writer who speaks?
Okay.
Explain that. I'm a communicator.
Okay.
And my whole life I've been making things. So when I was 8 years old, I drew Garfield comics. And when I was 12, I was in plays. When I was 16, I started a band. And when I was in college, I was an orator. I was as a public debater and speaker. And then I started a blog. And I traveled the country with a band for a year. And then I started publishing books. And I started teaching courses. And I used to I felt like I had to have a thing. And writing has often been my thing. But more recently, I realized performance is my thing. Acting, speaking, playing music, writing for me is really a performance. Yeah. It's creating something. And I like writing, but it's the thrill of getting to share it with somebody that I really like. So, yeah, I mean, writing is in some ways my first love. But I've been performing my whole life. I've been trying to get people's attention and get them to pay attention to me for a long time. And so I think of these just as different media. They're different modalities for sharing information. And I respect each of them in different ways. So I respect the medium of speaking. It's not just as simple as writing a speech and, reciting it. There's an art form to it. And I love that. So yeah, I mean, right now I see writing and speaking very integrated, which means I just wrote something down, like a few notes, and now I'm going to go turn it into a 10-minute video and post it on Instagram. And then from that, I'm going to as I process that, I'm going to sit down and write that into an article. So right now they're like sisters. They're two different vocations that are equally influencing each other.
I love that, because I have always seen it as an art, I think people who do what we do are creatives, they're artists, they express that in a lot of different ways. I'm wondering right now with all of the speakers that aren't speaking because of the
Mhm.
shutdown. I mean, you've
Sure.
had some get-togethers, you've had some virtual things, which
Yeah.
is a way to let off that valve, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself writing more when you're speaking less? I mean, are these kind of the same bucket, or do you just go in different directions when it comes to your creativity?
I try to it's been a weird few weeks, so
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a good, I've not been writing as much as I would have hoped.
Okay.
I have been connecting with people a lot.
Yeah.
Um I find that it's not about when I'm not writing, I'm speaking. When I'm not speaking, I'm writing. I wish it were about that. But my friend Michael Hyatt says you don't manage your time, you manage your energy.
Mm.
When I have a lot of energy, I want to speak and I want to write a lot. When I'm
Yep.
inspired, I want to go, 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 go. And when
Yeah.
I'm not inspired, I don't want to do anything. Now,
Hmm.
I don't think inspiration is something that happens to you. I think it's a muscle that you exercise, right? So
Hmm.
when I'm not writing, I'm not speaking. When I'm not speaking, I'm not writing. When I'm inspired, I have all these ideas that I want to come out.
Hmm.
So I find that they're related. I find that creativity begets more creativity.
Yeah.
That when I'm speaking more, I'm getting more ideas to write because as you've experienced, Scott, it's like I said this thing and somebody nodded. I didn't even realize that was a thing, and I'm going to write this down over here. And this might be
Yes.
a whole article. So for me, all creative work influences all creative work. So when I was
Hmm.
touring the country with a band, I started blogging to write about the experience.
Hmm.
So if I'm feeling a bit creatively lethargic, that probably means um, I need to get out and go for a walk,
Hmm.
right? I need to
Hmm.
disrupt my comfort a little bit. I've got to spike up the energy in my life because I'm just kind of blessed. So right now I'm kind of blessed. So I'm not
Yeah.
writing and I'm not speaking, and so I've got to create some experiences that energize me. So for me, that they go hand in hand.
Yeah, love that. And at the first kind of get together, the virtual get together that you hosted, like week 2 of the
Oh yeah.
shutdown, I guess, I was there, and you read from a book of poetry
Oh
called
yeah.
All the Words You Cannot Say.
Uh-huh.
And I went to Amazon while on that call, ordered that book. And I hate to admit this, it's the first book of poetry I've ever
Oh,
purchased in my life,
I totally get it. Yeah.
and sat on the front porch and read it cover to cover. And I think it came to me as a speaker, it provides illustrations,
Yep.
it provides
Yes.
validation to everything that we're going through right now. If there was a book
Yeah.
written for this time, it's that book.
Mhm.
Do you find yourself going to lots of different genres when it comes to what you're consuming as far as inspiration and that kind of stuff? Or do you just kind of hit around, or what's your thoughts?
I mean, I'm generally interested in things that most people are interested in.
Uh-huh.
And, if I'm being honest, that's probably some childish, I want to be different and special
Yep.
thing. Um, but I'm not trying to be avant-garde for the sake of being avant-garde. Like I've
Yeah.
always liked poetry.
Yeah.
And I've recently reconnected with it. What I do like doing, Scott, is I do like just what you shared, which is connecting someone with something that they otherwise, I don't want to read a book of poems,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I love that because as you experienced, when we borrow inspiration from other industries, it
Hmm.
can unlock something
Hmm.
that otherwise might, otherwise might have laid dormant for a while. You get a bunch of speakers together and they're all, talking about a lot of the same things, and you only learn and grow so much. And so, yeah, I've always dabbled a bit. And I'm interested in the story behind the story. So if I read a book where Brene Brown references Teddy Roosevelt, I go, what is his story and where did he come from and what is that about? And I might go read 3 biographies about Teddy Roosevelt.
Hmm.
Right? And I might find that the author wrote, 2 other biographies of American presidents and read those too. So the best research tip I ever got was from a friend who said, read the bibliographies of your favorite books.
Hmm.
Read the books you like referenced, right?
Yep.
So, you want to learn more about, Real Artists Don't Starve, that last book that I wrote. You want to learn more about art and creativity and business. We'll open up the end notes because I talk about the books that I read that I love, that really interested me,
Hmm.
um, that informed this book. So I'm curious about ideas and the people and ideas behind those ideas. And I'm just really interested in somebody saying something in a way that's different from how everybody else is saying it. So that probably just naturally draws me into maybe different things. I don't feel like I'm too avant-garde or too out there. I read a lot of business books. I read a lot of biographies. I read a lot of nonfiction. But I'm curious about old ideas. I'm curious about things that have been around for a while. I generally don't trust something if it's super popular. So if I can find some old random idea or book or pamphlet or something that sheds some light on a current situation, I love that. I love connecting current problems to old or unknown solutions.
Yeah. And I love that. And as speakers and as creatives, anything we read becomes potential fodder for the next talk, the next book, the next whatever, as long as we're, of course, citing the person who wrote it in the first place.
Yeah.
When I read that book on the front porch, I was making notes in my phone of pages that might help prove a point.
And what's so cool about that, pardon my interruption. What's so cool about that is, we have enough people enough speakers telling the starfish story.
Yes.
Don't do that. Don't be that guy.
It's done.
Yeah. You pull out a poetry book by Ian Thomas that probably nobody in the audience has heard yet. Powerful. These days, especially with the internet where everybody can access any kind of information.
Yep.
It's not enough to be better. You've got to be different. Right? Different is better than better. And so if everybody's referencing the starfish story that was passed around in 1992 via every email chain you ever were on. Well,
Chicken soup for the soul. Yeah.
That's been done. Yes. Cool. It was cool, 30 years ago. Now it's old hat. So what are you going to do now? And how can you make yourself different, especially in the world of speaking where a lot of people are doing the same old thing over and over and over again, and we're hearing the same stories and illustrations. I think that's fine, but it's going to be harder to tell that story better than the best person who told it. So what if you had a different story? What if you had a different illustration or idea?
Yeah, I love that. And I'd love to say that I've read all of your writings and books. I just haven't. I've read The In-Between and I read Wrecked. And both of those books came into my life when they were needed, which was cool. The In-Between came when I was retiring from the police department and launching full-time into speaking and wanting to grow the new business. Do you have a book that you just say, this is my go-to book that I've written that really speaks to me? Is there a favorite? I know it's hard. I've got 2 kids. I don't have a favorite, but do you have a book that you would say, if nobody reads anything that's Jeff Goins written other than this, what would you?
The book that appeals to the most amount of people is The Art of Work, which is a book about finding your purpose.
Okay.
So that one, The Art of Work. It's a book about vocation, career, job, life, how to discover the life that you were meant to live. Yeah.
Love that. And I think for a time like now, there's a lot of people trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. During this time of quarantine, during this time of everything is shutting down, it's a time to explore different possibilities.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I had the thought today that the unknown, insecurity, always creates possibility.
Yes.
Because when you're insecure, you don't know what's going to happen. And we love, I think a lot of us love possibility, but it's hard to find possibility in a state of security. Yeah. And so one of the beautiful things about anytime things are insecure, job market, stock market, the world, right? That there's a lot of fear that goes along with that, but there's also excitement, right? There's also what could be, what does this make possible? And I don't want to be glib or diminish the fear and all of that of any crisis, but you're right. A lot of people, not necessarily even of their own accord, they didn't choose this, are having to rethink their lives, their jobs, where they live. I have a friend who just got evicted because their job was connected to where they lived, and now they're looking for a job and a place to live. And it's like, man. Yeah. So the times are a-changing, and what better time to reconsider the story that you've been telling yourself about who you are. Right. So much of who we think of ourselves is based on our stories. And when, for example, I'm a police officer, right? There's a whole persona that goes along with that. You strip that story away. Who are you now? You begin to explore other possibilities. Kind of love that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember listening to an NPR interview years ago where they were interviewing this like novelist who started writing at age 60.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you know, you used to think this and you talked about this and now you seem to be talking about some other thing. I think he was like a journalist and then he became a novelist. And they were like, you've changed basically, right?
Right.
And he said, one of the greatest things about being a human being is that you get to change.
Right.
But we don't like this, right? We're like, are you still you, Scott? You know, you've changed so much, you know?
Right. Yeah.
We think of it as a good thing, an honorable, integrous thing to not change. And the truth is, you take away part of how I live my daily life, right? You take away my job, you take away, you know, my marriage, my family, my friends, something, and I start to change.
Yeah.
So the question, who am I really? Who do I get to be in this new season? Very scary and very exciting.
Yeah, and the sad part is, and I saw this a lot in the police department because I started speaking 8 years before I retired. I grew this side
Love
gig,
that.
and so I could step into it full time when I retired. And when I started becoming successful, the pack mentality came into play,
Yeah.
and people that were my peers started kind of nipping at my heels, fall back in line,
Yeah.
writing anonymous letters that I was working on things at the police department that involved my
Yeah.
business, all of that pack mentality. And I think today, during this time of transition, that has kind of dropped away. I think
Wow.
people are saying, good for you, go
Yeah.
and find what you want to do. And I hope that carries on past this quarantine.
So even after you left the police department, you're a full-time professional speaker,
Mm-hmm.
you were still hearing from people.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. You know, and mostly while I tried to do both.
I see.
And
Yeah.
and I scheduled posts. I got up at 4 every morning,
I
and I've
know.
talked
Yeah, I
about this
get
on the
it.
podcast. I hustled, I scheduled posts.
Yeah.
And so when the post hit at noon while I was working,
Yeah.
people were assuming that I was doing both jobs at the same time. And it was
Yep.
just, you know, who are you to do what it is you're doing? And I think we tend to do that sometimes to other people too.
I was doing this 10 years ago when people didn't even understand like scheduling social media posts and stuff.
Right.
And they
Yeah.
were like, I'm in a meeting with you and you're tweeting, what's going on? You know?
Right. Yeah.
I totally get that. I had an experience once right at the end of my working with a nonprofit, and a person who was kind of above me, but not my direct, like I wasn't his direct report,
Mm-hmm.
said, you know, people are talking. I said, really? What are they saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're saying, you know, like just like you're working a lot on this personal brand thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, I am. I spend about, you know, an hour a day on it before I start my job.
Right.
And he's like, well, it's just some concern. I go, about what? Well, that your brand, your personal brand is starting to eclipse the brand of the organization.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, like
Right.
that's my fault that more people are interested in a person than in an organization.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. And I wasn't really bothered by it. I was like, okay, cool. Like I was kind of on my way out at that point anyway, so it didn't
Right.
bother me. But I had a friend who worked in a nonprofit too, similar thing. This was way back in the day. And he was just a blogger. And he was working for this nonprofit organization. And they were like, you're blogging too much. And he was like, I am?
Yeah.
And then he kind of turned it. And it was his boss. He goes, hey, don't you coach your daughter's basketball team? He goes, yeah. He goes, how much do you do that? How much time do you do that? Well, you know, get off work early every, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday from, you know, 3:30 to 5 or whatever, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and it was like 2 hours a day. He's like, oh, like, you know, 6 hours a week plus, and then the weekends, how long are the games? And it was like, you know, 10 to 15 hours a week he was doing this. He goes, that's a lot of time. He goes, I spend 30 minutes blogging once a week.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, the difference between your hobby and mine is public. People see me doing it.
Right.
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 Yeah. So,
And you get paid for it. I think that's really what it comes down to. When you become successful as a coach, you know, that's philanthropic. That's what, but
yeah, right.
you know, when we start becoming successful on our own, there are those people who will, you know, try to cut you down.
Yeah.
And I think those people reveal themselves, and they're in every profession.
It's just jealousy.
It is. And, you know, recently I just finished your newest book that you wrote with Grant Baldwin.
Yeah.
Grant was on in December, did an interview when that book launched, and
Yeah.
we pushed that out. How did you hook up with Grant to write this book, and why did you why did you kind of take on this project? Because this is something different for you, right? Writing someone
Yeah.
else's
Yeah. And I'm doing a
content.
lot of it now, a lot of ghostwriting.
Okay.
Grant has been a friend for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I like working with friends. Some people don't like working with friends. I like it because you have
Mm-hmm.
rapport, you understand each other. I wouldn't work with every friend that I have,
Mm-hmm.
but I would prefer to work with somebody who's a friend versus not.
Yeah.
Maybe with some exception. The story is, a publisher called me, asked if I knew of any people who wanted to publish a book, and I thought of Grant, and I
Mm-hmm.
said, "Hey, man, you should write this book." He goes, "I don't want to do that." He goes, "I'll do it if you write it for me." And he was
Yeah.
joking, and I was
Right.
like, I knew they wanted to pay him quite a bit of money to do it, and I was like, "I'll do it, and
Mm-hmm.
and and we'll split the money."
Uh-huh.
And he goes, "Okay," and I was like, "Okay." And I said yes to it because, I mean, I could have gone off and written my own book and frankly made more money.
Right.
It wasn't about the money,
Mm-hmm.
but it was enough money that I was like, cool, I'll do this.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the possibility. It was about doing something new and
Mm-hmm.
seeing, can I do this? Can I be a ghostwriter?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm going to try it. I hope I never get to a point in my life or career where I go, I don't do that. Now,
Mm.
I think it's good to know yourself. I mean, there's
Right.
certain boundaries and values that I have, but I hope I keep saying, man, I've never done that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to try it. Now, if I try it and I suck at it or I hate it and I go, then no, I don't do that. But
Yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't know if I would be any good at it. And I really enjoyed it. And in fact, saying yes to that opportunity turned into a whole new business, a ghostwriting agency where we're now working with over a dozen authors this year
Mm-hmm.
to write and sell their books to traditional publishers or help them self-publish the book and launch those books in the next year or two. So that, I mean, a whole new business, a whole
Yeah.
new multi-six-figure, if not seven-figure business was birthed out of a phone call where I said, okay, I'll try it.
Yeah.
I
I
love
love that.
that.
And I think Grant would agree if he were here. The only reason that book is out and in the wild is because you wrote it. He's got a lot of plates spinning. He's got a lot of things he's doing. Writing a book is just wasn't a priority for him.
Yeah.
But he had more than enough content to put a book into the wild.
He did. And I felt like it needed to happen.
Yeah.
That his brand needed a book to position him as an expert. And he had so much great information that deserves to be in a book because it's
Mm-hmm.
different, right? It's different.
Yes.
Like especially in the world of speaking, it's like, hey, you want to be a speaker, go to this website or listen to this podcast. I mean, that'll work for some people, but other people, it's like, have you read this book? Have you read The Successful Speaker? You need
Mm-hmm.
to read it. This is everything that you need to know. It's like the 4-hour work week, especially when that book came out. It's like, you want to quit your job and travel the world and do all these amazing things. Read this book,
Yes.
And there's something about a book, especially a physical book, a paperback or hardcover book that you can hand to somebody.
Yep.
Read this book that is still very, very powerful, even in today's age.
Yeah, because the alternative for a speaker is go listen to all my talks,
Right.
listen to all my podcasts.
Yeah.
But you basically took all of that and distilled it down. And the funny thing was, I was telling somebody the other day, as I read the book, there was definitely parts that were Grant. But Jeff popped up, your voice popped up several times, which I thought was cool because it was like, I'm familiar enough with both of yours work.
Yeah.
But you complement each other so it wasn't distracting. I'm like, that's something Jeff would say. That's something Grant would say. And it was cool for me knowing both of you to kind of go through it that way. But as you read that book or wrote that book, excuse me, is there anything that you kind of took from it for your speaking business? Is there anything that you learned that you're now applying to your speaking business, or was it things you were kind of already doing?
Yeah. I mean, it was funny as I was embarrassed because I've been friends with Grant for a long time. I knew all these things, but it's like when something's so close to you, you're like one of my best friends has never read any of my books and I don't expect him to. He's like, bro, if I need to know any of that stuff, I'll just ask you. I don't need to read your book. And it was like that with Grant. I would be like, hey man, what do I do here? He's like, dude, listen to the podcast. I'm like, no, you just tell me. and I think, we who have friends of like influencers or whatever, we forget that like they're giving their best stuff away for free. They're not holding back.
Right.
And you can get a lot more out of a podcast or a book than you can get out of a lunch sometimes.
Right.
So as we were writing this book together, I was trying to grow my speaking business. And what was happening was I was internalizing all the stuff that I was writing.
Right.
And I would go, on a gig, and I would go, I should write a letter to this person and say hi to that person and go do this. And I'm like, why do I want to do that? Oh yeah, we just wrote that chapter last week.
Yes.
And I would tell him, hey, I did this and they booked me again.
Right.
Like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, this is amazing. And I'd never done it. Like I'd never done these basic things that he told me. Email all these event planners and ask them if they're looking for speakers. No, I'll just wait for them to call me. People know who I am or whatever,
Right.
And it was embarrassing how simple this stuff was and how I hadn't done it for so long. And it took me writing a book. Like I had to write the book to learn the lesson.
Yeah.
But I had my best year of speaking the year that I wrote that book.
Yeah.
And continued until recently to just keep increasing my fees, increasing the amount of appearances that I was doing. It really, really worked. And when we were writing that book, it's interesting what you said about the voices, because the way I thought of it was like Grant and I created a new character called Grant the author. And that person wrote the book. And it was a mix of like me and Grant. And it wasn't me and it wasn't him. It was this different voice that we created for this particular project. And I think about that with speaking too. Like I'm not me on stage saying the same things that I've always said. In a certain sense, I have to become the character while still being true to myself and my message and not going too far into depths that I shouldn't be wading in. I have to become the character that this audience needs me to be right now to help them. And tomorrow I'll be, a similar but slightly tweaked different version of that character for the next project. And I think I like that. I come from a, drama background, acting in plays and stuff.
Right.
I like the idea that I could get to kind of try on these different personalities and perform for whatever audience I'm performing for.
Yeah. I love that. I love that the book writing process helped your speaking career. I'm not surprised by that. My wife and I have been married for almost 23 years, coming up on 23 years. And we teach a pre-marriage class at our church because when we drive home, when we're driving home, we're like, that thing we told them they should do, we should probably do more.
We should do that.
That's the stuff that works.
Yep.
We know it. We've gotten lazy. Now we just have to do it. And I think this book is that for new speakers. It's a playbook. For seasoned speakers, it's a things that they knew all along they should have been doing and they're just not. So I think it's going to help everybody in the speaking community. And I'm super glad that you and Grant collaborated on that. So Jeff, where can people find more about you, kind of what you're up to, and connect with you after hearing this?
All my stuff is at my website, goinswriter.com, Goins writer.com. I publish a weekly blog post and podcast, just like an audio essay. It's just me sharing for about 30 minutes my riffs on creative work. And then if you want to connect with me directly, I'm very active on Instagram at Jeff Goins. I read and respond to all my DMs, so you can come find me there. But everything is at the website, social media, blog, podcast, all at goinswriter.com.
Love that. I will link to that in the show notes. But Jeff, it's been a pleasure. I love the content that you're putting out there. I love the people that you're helping. And I've been a fan for quite some time. So having you on the podcast is super special for me. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks, Scott. It's my pleasure.